Welcome. I'm Bob Tuttle, and like Dr. Green, I'd like to welcome you here tonight for this terrific event. We're really fortunate and honored to have as our guest speaker John Brennan, Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Director Brennan has devoted almost his entire career to the CIA, having joined the agency in 1980 after receiving a master's degree in government from the University of Texas. And during the next many years, he served as the agency's in the agency's main analytic arm, specializing in the Near East and Southeast Asia, before directing counterterrorism analysis in the early 1990s. He was the agency's intelligence briefer to President Clinton in 1994 and 95. And after assignment as Chief of Station in the Middle East, he served as the Chief of Staff to the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And he next worked as Deputy Executive Director of the CIA when he began leading a multi-agency effort to establish what would become the National Counterterrorism Center. After retiring from the CIA in 2005, Director Brennan worked in the private sector for 3 years. He then returned to government service, working for President Obama in the White House for 4 years as Assistant to the President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. In 2013, he was nominated by the President, confirmed by the Senate, and sworn in as Director of the CIA. John Brennan is a professional, he is a patriot, and one of the outstanding Americans serving our country. Please welcome Director Brennan and our moderator, Dr. Green.
Welcome, Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador Tuttle, Director Brennan. I'm going to just dive right in because I want to move through my questions and allow people from the audience to ask questions as well. The CIA was born in what? Wild Bill Donovan got a call up in Wall Street from Washington, hot-footed down to Washington, and he created the OSS. And what I find really interesting, I guess I'd like your view, is if Donovan walked into headquarters today, what would he think? How does, what's sort of the continuity between the early pioneers of what became the CIA and this enormous, very modern, high-tech organization today?
Well, first of all, that is close to my mouth, isn't it? I just want to say thank you, Jerry and Ambassador Tuttle and everybody else from the Pacific Council inviting me out here. As I mentioned a bit earlier, it is always an honor for me to represent the women and men of CIA who are doing some spectacular things around the world on a daily basis. And I am just thrilled to have had the opportunity to come back to CIA after the first 25 years and now have the privilege and honor of being a director of CIA. I still pinch myself as I think, what's a guy from Jersey who started out in 1980 with the agency doing as director of CIA. But if Wild Bill Donovan, who, as you said, led the Office of Strategic Services during World War II, if he came into CIA headquarters, I think the first thing he would do is marvel at the great statue of him in our lobby and the many statues of him throughout the building, because he really does, I think, symbolize what it is that the agency was set up after World War II to do, which was to make sure that we as an organization can do everything to keep our country safe. And I think he would take note of the tremendous changes in the global landscape from the 1940s, especially on the technological front. I had the privilege, and every year I had the privilege of participating in a dinner for OSS veterans who are in their 90s and some in their hundreds, it's a tremendous event of great patriotism and dedication of individuals who really risked their lives for this country. And they had to do what they did with great guile and courage and innovation, parachuting behind enemy lines and putting themselves at great risk in order to address the Nazi threat of World War II and also from Japan. And although we still have some of these battlefronts that are raging, the environment now is much different as technology has really changed our way of life. And we were talking earlier about different communication systems and the information technology that has really transformed all of our lives. And if you walked through the agency's building and saw some of the great capabilities we have, technical, scientific, I think he would see that the work that we do is much different than almost the trench warfare that the OSS was in. At the same time, and people have questioned why CIA still is involved in paramilitary types of activities. Well, partly it's because of our OSS roots, but also there are far corners of the world where we still need that paramilitary capability. You look at what has happened in Afghanistan over the last 15 years, and I must say that the CIA, our military colleagues, continue to be at the pointy end of the spear, and many have given their lives for that. So I think he would see that we still do some of the same things that he and the OSS officers did back in the 1940s, but at the same time, we have so many more capabilities as well as tools in our toolkit in order to try to keep this country safe. And also, I think he would then see how diverse and complex and numerous the number of challenges that we face worldwide. In World War II, it was the Axis against the Allies. The world was ordered in that respect. After World War II, we had the Soviet Union and the Cold War. Now there has been almost a diffusion of capabilities as well as challenges to the United States. So it's not as though we know the enemy and we're going after them in some theaters. There are many enemies out there that we need to use as much guile and innovation today as we did back then.
If you look at your predecessors, one of the many qualities that distinguishes you from your predecessors, you actually began your career as an analyst. So guys like me take great pride in the accomplishment of guys like you, because I used to be an analyst, and I know all your teachers from UT, those are all my colleagues. What does it say about the craft of intelligence today and this very large intelligence community that an analyst, which I take as really good news as opposed to a trigger puller, and we all love trigger pullers, but it's different. It's a changing course for CIA, and I think there's something to be learned from that. So I'd be curious to hear what you think of that.
Well, as you point out, I spent most of my career in CIA doing analytic work, either being an analyst myself or being manager or supervisor of analysts. But I started out in operations for a very short period of time, and then I shifted over. But then also I got back into operations when I was chief of station out in Saudi Arabia in the late 90s. And what I found when I was an analyst is that I was able to really understand, explore all the different dimensions of foreign cultures and those different aspects that come into play on national security. And what I find is that, at least in CIA, the analytic cadre, the analytic workforce, was really developed in a way to be very versatile. So you find analysts who are serving in State Department. I served a rotation with the State Department for 2 years when I was over in Saudi Arabia in the early 80s. But you find CIA analysts not just inside of CIA doing analytic work and working in terms of producing the products for the president and others. They support operations. They drive those operations and collection missions as well as paramilitary operations. They are serving down at the National Security Council in those policy roles because they know the people, they know the societies, they know the cultures, they know the political and social features of the landscape. And so I just find that versatility something that is really embedded in analysts as they continue to develop their professional credentials at CIA.
I'd like to shift. This is going to be very disjointed, so my apologies to everybody, but it's a complicated world with a lot of problems that are not siloed, but they're not necessarily the same. When Mitt Romney was running for president and said the greatest threat to the United States is Russia, everybody laughed at him. Russia today is certainly a challenge to the United States in the Crimea, in Syria, and elsewhere. How do we navigate that? I don't want to call it a threat because there are areas where we collaborate with them, but there are other areas in which they're really a problem. So what's the play with Russia? How do we manage Russia?
Well, clearly Russia under President Putin is trying to assert itself more and more on the world stage. in terms of wanting to make sure that Russia's voice is heard and its influence is felt, not just in the near abroad of Russia, Ukraine obviously, the very emotional issues for Putin and the Russians as far as what's happening in that near abroad as they're trying to pull some of those countries back toward them as opposed to their drift toward the West. But also as we look right now in the Middle East, Russia's support for Mr. Putin, for Mr. Assad, President Assad of Syria, is what is keeping that conflict going. And Russia is one of our biggest adversaries on the intelligence front in terms of, spy versus spy or whatever. But I also will say that we do a lot with the Russians. The Sochi Olympics, we, CIA, work very closely with our Russian counterparts to make sure that we were able to share information so that all of the athletes and the attendees there were kept safe from terrorist attacks, and we were able to disrupt a number of them. I have had, just over the past couple of months, a number of conversations with Alexander Bortnikov, who's the head of the FSB, talking about the terrorist threat that exists in the Middle East and how it is affecting our common interests. In fact, last year, in January of 15, I hosted Mr. Bortnikov at CIA, and it was quite surreal to see Mr. Bortnikov, the head of the FSB, walk across CIA SEAL in our lobby. I took great delight in welcoming him to my office as he wondered if he was going to get out. He did, but we had a long conversation, over an hour and a half, close to 2 hours, about what it is that we can and need to do together, because the scourge of terrorism most recently manifests in ISIL, how it does affect our collective interests. And there are things we can do and we should do with Russia. At the same time, there are a lot of things that divide and separate us that we need to be able to address.
Let me ask you, as the former briefer of one of our presidents, you would get up every day at some ungodly hour, presumably, and go to the White House and in, I don't know, 20 minutes or 30 minutes review everything terrible that happened on the planet in the last 24 hours, and I, to this day, I don't know how you cram so much bad news into such a short period of time. But the role of CIA, not simply as a producer of intelligence, but as a key cornerstone of the policy community, I don't think is widely understood, because you're not simply machines processing data. You certainly do that. You really have a unique insight into global politics. So how does that work? I mean, do they come to you and ask your advice? Do you make policy recommendations?
As you pointed out, when I was a briefer for President Clinton, I would have to get up about 1 o'clock in the morning, so I'd go to bed a little bit earlier, and get into work, and for about 3.5 or 4 hours, I'd prepare the brief, and then I'd go down to the Oval Office, and there's the PDB session that is still held right now, and usually the first part of that is when the intelligence briefer would come in. At the time, it was someone like myself. More recently, it's been the Director of National Intelligence or Director of CIA or whomever. And so for the first 10 or 15 minutes, they go through the litany of challenges and issues that are out there. And then the intelligence briefers would be dismissed, and then the policymakers, the president's staff. So in the first term, I was his assistant for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. So I would sit there and be there for the intelligence briefing, and then after the intelligence briefer left, we would talk about, okay, what are we going to do from a policy perspective? What do we need to do and address, and who should we call, and what type of meetings should we hold? So it really showed that there was this relationship between intelligence and policy that drives the policy agenda of the president. But it doesn't just end in the Oval Office. At every meeting that was held at the White House, and there is a policy process that goes through different layers. And it starts at what's called the Intelligence Policy Committee, or the Interagency Policy Committee, the IPC, which is at the Assistant Secretary level. They will debate an issue, and then it goes up to the deputies of the various departments and agencies. And then it will go to a Principals Committee meeting, and then it will go to a National Security Council meeting. So when I go down for a Principal Committee meeting, Susan Rice will chair that meeting. And when I go down for a National Security Council meeting, the President will chair that meeting. At the beginning of every meeting, whether we're talking about Ukraine or terrorism or Syria or China, whatever, it starts off with an intelligence briefing. And Jim Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, who is the primary intelligence advisor to the President as a result of intelligence reforms that were done about a decade ago, he will start off and give the President and others the perspective of what's going on, let's say on the battlegrounds of Syria. I will then follow Jim and give him some additional information about the president, what CIA may be doing, what is our activities on the ground, what we're doing with some of our liaison partners, what are some of the capabilities we have, our collection gaps, what are the opportunities that we have. That will serve as the appetizer to the discussion that takes place then among the policymakers. And throughout that discussion, and I was just at a Principals Committee meeting yesterday with Susan Rice and others on a couple of issues that lasted about 2.5 hours. And so throughout the course of that discussion, in addition to that frontispiece of the intelligence serving, we will weigh in with our perspectives in terms of if you go this policy course, it has these likely implications or consequences. These are the pros and the cons. So that interaction between intelligence and policy is constant from the President's PDB session in the mornings through the course of the day as these various policy committee meetings are held.
Let me shift again. I apologize for my singular lack of focus, which is actually who I am, so this is not that much of a departure from the normal me. People, at least here, seem to be enjoying the fact that the price of oil is low. Yeah, and everybody drives into the gas station and they marvel how low it is. There are profound geopolitical implications which do not necessarily favor us as a consequence of low oil prices. And I wonder if you could talk about why people should care about oil prices beyond their ability to drive big cars with big engines.
Well, it has tremendous implications across the global stage as far as the planned budgets and revenues that a lot of the oil producers were counting on that now have been halved or more than that as a result of the lower oil prices. And that has tremendous implications, particularly for some of these wealthier states that were planning to, let's say, contribute to various humanitarian causes or invest in certain types of activities. So the ripple effect is significant. Now, the oil importers certainly welcome this, but it also has tremendous impact on areas outside of the oil sector in terms of whether it is tourism, as well as, I was reading in the Financial Times, as I was flying here, that because of the lower price of oil, restaurants in New York that used to be able to sell their vegetable oil and fatty oils from their various cooking machines were able to sell that at $3 a gallon to the companies that produced biodiesel fuel. But now that biodiesel fuel is not competitive with diesel fuel, these restaurants are not able to sell their oil, and so now they're having to pay for people to take it away. So I think people are looking at the lower price of oil. It should help us all because it's going to be less costly for whether it be our gas or jet fuel or whatever. There are second and third and fourth order consequences that really need to be taken into account. So you look at the domestic implications of it. As the price of oil drops, you see the stock market drop as well. And so this also is being felt in countries around the world. So it has created quite a bit of turbulence, not just in the international economic arena, but also in terms of how different governments are coping with the implications of that, whether they have to tighten their belts because they don't have the revenue they were anticipating, or they're no longer going to be getting the largesse from those countries that used to contribute to their economic well-being.
I want to shift to China just because it's sort of the hardy perennial of issues, and specifically South China Sea. It's clear that they're not building resorts on these artificial islands, and if they did, who would go there? How do we deal with that? How do we address it? And where is that coming from? Is this a consequence of TPP? Is it are they taking advantage of our presidential election season? Is this I'm curious about the implications of it and also the timing.
Well, I think President Xi Jinping has a clear strategic vision about what he wants to accomplish during his time as president of China on the economic world stage, but also in terms of the influence that China has, particularly in its neighborhood. And so this has been a very deliberate and very methodical sort of strategy as far as creating new facts on the ground, or in this case, facts in the sea, as far as building out these reefs and small islets that are out there and putting the airfields as well as military weaponry. And there are press reports about the aircraft that they now have deployed to Woody Island there. And it's a way to, again, assert themselves. And there's an intimidation factor there, I think, as far as their regional neighbors. But also, I think they believe that this is their area, and they're, I think, interested in seeing whether they can reduce U.S. influence in the area. And that's why there was a very deliberate message that the president sent as far as the pivot to Asia, making sure that with all the instability and things that are going on in the Middle East and Ukraine and whatever else, that our close partners and allies in East Asia and that part of the world do not feel that the United States has neglected them. In fact, we're going to make sure that we continue to develop the relationships with them in the economic realm, in the military partnership realm, because we don't want these smaller nations to be cowed under the Chinese dominance in that region. So I think, as we've seen, President Xi Jinping has more power than any other Chinese leader, being head of government, head of party, head of the military, and has embarked on a rather aggressive campaign to, again, assert Chinese influence in that area. I was out in the area last year, and they were the various Southeast Asian nations were very interested in TPP because they feel as though that would be a counterbalance as far as the Chinese influence in that area. So one of the things that we as a government need to do, I think, is make sure that all of these parts of the world feel as though the United States' influence and interests, and in many areas, our protective nature is going to be felt by them.
Southern California is unique and distinctive in many ways. LA is the only city that's at once Asian, Latin American, and American. We are the second city of, Armenia, Korea, Iran, Cambodia, a long, long list. I don't want to say we're part of the global battleground, but we are part of the global intelligence network. How does intelligence work in Southern California? We're part of the world, and there's lots of movement back and forth, to Iran, to all sorts of places. Who's responsible for that?
That's a message there.
We got our answer.
Well, I think the world has become much more interconnected over the last several generations. So you're right, this area is an exceptionally diverse area. It's one that intersects so many different peoples and cultures and countries. And I need to be able to spend more time outside of the Washington, D.C. area because, as I mentioned earlier, earlier this week, I swore in 111 new officers at CIA that come from 45 states. And one of the things that the CIA is really trying to do is to really encourage and celebrate the diversity of this country finding expression within CIA's workforce. We need to have those different backgrounds and perspectives. I don't want, all Ivy League people. What I want are people who have grown up in different areas, different experiences, environments, because every part of this country now is affected in so many fundamental ways by the rest of the world. And for those who think that the United States has been insulated and isolated from events, whether it be in the Middle East or developments in East Asia, I think we really are fooling ourselves because, as you pointed out, the lower cost of oil has reverberations throughout. So I think what we as a people, the United States, need to do is to raise our international literacy as far as understanding the various developments around the world and how what's happening in the far-off corners really can find their way in terms of the impact on our shores here. So, the intelligence business is one that has to take into account California's needs.
A final question, and I'm going to throw it open. I'm curious, how do you collect intelligence in areas where we don't have access? I was in Iran in July, and I didn't see a single American, nothing. I mean, nobody.
I've been meaning to talk to you about that trip to Iran.
I will tell you more than you want to hear, actually. So, Yemen, Libya, Somalia. I mean, there are places where we can't, just blithely show up. And the one thing I can say about my time in Iran is they knew everything that I did. I was switching I mean, we watch Homeland. We know how to do it. And my tradecraft was superb. And, you know, my phones were bugged. They knew everybody I met with and so forth. You know, how do pros do it? I mean, it's just astounding. The part you can tell us,
I was going to say,
obviously.
yeah, let me share all the secrets with you, Jerry. But your point, I think, is a very good one, and one that I've talked about a lot with our workforce over the last year. Given that there are a lot of parts of this world that we really need to have the insight into what's going on, and a lot of parts of this world are denied to us, either because countries like Iran and North Korea we don't have relations with, so we don't have an embassy there, we don't have an official presence. But increasingly in the Middle East, whether you're talking about Syria or Libya or Yemen, we had embassies there not too many years ago, and now we no longer have embassies there. So CIA, in many respects, needs to replicate some of the audacity and innovation that the OSS demonstrated in World War II. We need to be expeditionary, and we need to be able to go where there are no official presence or platforms for us to be tethered to. And even those countries where we do have embassies, a lot of times the security requirements and limitations, restrictions, prevent us from doing all we need to do. So we are now moving aggressively to enhance our expeditionary capability. We've always had that. And without going into detail, I think you would be pleased, being a Middle East scholar that you are, that the CIA is actively engaged, involved, and present in a number of these areas where we don't have an official presence. We need to do that. There are risks associated with it. We don't have the ability then to have diplomatic immunity because of our embassy affiliation. But this is why women and men from all different walks of American life join the CIA, because they want to make a difference in this country's future and do what they can to keep this country safe. And so we need to be able to make full use of our authorities, our capabilities, as well as our technical capabilities, because you want to be able to send people out, but you want to be able to communicate with them. You want to be able to do it securely and in a very timely fashion. So the new world that is emerging with a lot of the spaces that are ungoverned and where terrorist organizations and others are now plying their trade, CIA needs to be up close and personal with them, either CIA officers or those individuals who, for a variety of reasons, will pledge their support to CIA.
Thank you. All right, we're going to open up. Please wait till the microphone makes its way to you. Dean Philip Sieve from USC.
I'd like to go back to Russia for a moment. How would you compare the capabilities of Russian intelligence today with those of the Soviets during the Cold War? And are they as competent today as they were back then? And a second part would be to look specifically at the Baltic states. How much, in a country such as Estonia with a large Russian-speaking population, how active is Russian intelligence there?
Well, Russian intelligence services, and there are a number of them, the most prominent being the FSB, the SVR, the GRU, these are professional intelligence services that have a long history of espionage and intelligence work. They're very aggressive. They are well-funded, well-resourced. They have a president who is a former member of the KGB and is a strong advocate for them. They also are used as, in many respects, the vanguard of Russian policy objectives and agendas. And that's why you see in places like Ukraine and other areas, you point out the Baltic states, the Russian presence is very significantly felt by a number of these countries as the Russians use these intelligence organizations to work with locals, try to recruit individuals in various areas in order to advocate and be proponents for Russian interests. So they're capable, they're numerous, they are aggressive, and they are probably, when you look at our various intelligence adversaries, I would say they are right up there as far as being the most formidable.
Next question.
That doesn't mean that we're not better than them by a long shot. We are.
Absolutely. Jane Olson.
Thank you, Director. I wanted to bring up the subject of drones, which has not been talked about yet tonight. It certainly changed the climate and opportunity for intelligence. Could you discuss just briefly what are some of the benefits and risks and the fallout when we get it wrong and have civilian deaths?
Drones is such a big category, and we refer to them in many different ways. Remotely piloted aircraft. And people think that they're pilotless. Well, they're not. They are operated by pilots, but they happen not to be in the platforms that are in the air. They're pilots on the ground from a remote distance. And drones, or these types of platforms, have multiple uses. As we see, they're used for a variety of reasons for ISR, which is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, which is to collect information, whether it be the Department of Homeland Security or whether it be the FBI looking for somebody who's lost in the canyons of the Rockies or whatever. So they are tremendously capable because you can get them to different places where you cannot maybe even get manned aircraft or people. And they come in all different sizes. Now, I think what you are talking about is the use of these platforms as instruments of war, that they can then launch missiles against targets. And they have been embedded within the U.S. military's array of aircraft for a number of years. And I must say that as an instrument of war, and it's hard to admire instruments of war because by definition they are designed to carry out kinetic strikes. They have tremendous capability as far as precision, surgical precision, to go against the targets that they're after. They have the ability to loiter for many hours over a target, observe it, incorporate various types of intelligence. It's not just observation, but they also have different types, what's called payloads, that can collect different types of intelligence, signals intelligence, and other things. So that if there is a decision made by the higher command that action needs to be taken, kinetic action, these platforms can deliver ordnance onto the target with great precision, to include being able to guide that munition all the way to the target, to include, as it's observing the target, if it sees that civilians or individuals that are not intended to be struck come into the crosshairs, that ordnance can be redirected so that it's called, going cold, so that it will not, in fact, incur that collateral damage and civilian casualties. Now, there are a lot of stories out there and a lot of reports about the very high number of civilian casualties that have been incurred as a result of these strikes. I can tell you that a lot of these reports very much misrepresent what the facts are. As an instrument of war, and particularly as the United States has used it, have civilians been killed? Yes. Very unfortunate. But in war, sometimes these things happen. But when I look at that as an instrument of war, as opposed to other types of munitions that do not have the same type of precision and care, this is a platform, this is a weapon that can be used in a manner that really does minimize those civilian casualties.
Next question. So hard to see. Bennett Ramberg.
Director, the United States has been attempting to get the Turkish government to seal a 93-kilometer area along the Syrian border to prevent the entry of foreign fighters. Can you speak to us about the success, and how do the foreign fighters otherwise get into Syria?
Repeat the first part of that question again. I didn't hear.
You were a little garbled.
Oh, sure. The United States government has been attempting to get the Turkish government to seal a 93-kilometer zone along the Syrian border. So the question I have is, how successful is that cooperation with Turkey gone, and how do the foreign fighters get otherwise into Syria?
You're talking about the northern part of Syria, which borders Turkey, has been the border across which most of the foreign fighters who have found their way into Syria traverse. They go through that border. The Turkish government has closed off a number of the areas there, but the 90-kilometer or so piece that you're talking about is referred to as the Manbij pocket there. And there is a lot of cross-border activity that takes place on a regular basis, because a lot of the people inside of Syria rely on the commerce and trade that goes across it, including humanitarian organizations and others that bring in those supplies. Now, the foreign fighters have found various ways to get across that border. Sometimes there are smuggling routes, sometimes they go in as purporting to be legitimate commercial traders or whatever else, or part of families and tribes that regularly cross it. And so you're right, the Turkish government over the course of the past 2 years has been criticized by a number of countries, including by the United States, for not doing enough there. I will say that the Turks have increased their attention to that border and really have tried to close it down because it's not in their interest for that border to be porous. As you know, they're facing right now a very serious threat from terrorists, the PKK, which has carried out a lot of attacks inside of Turkey, Ankara, Istanbul, southeastern Turkey, that has led to hundreds of deaths of Turkish civilians and security and police. And so they're trying to close it off to those individuals who are trying to do harm on either side of the border. We need to do more, but a lot of individuals that flow into Syria misrepresent themselves as far as their intentions. But also, it's a long border, and there are ways, again, with these smuggling networks to get people in and out of it. But it's not just Turkey. They also come in across the Lebanese border, also through Jordan, and also from Iraq. So it's a challenge. These are large border areas, large swaths of territory that require constant vigilance, and you cannot man the entire border with border patrols. And at nighttime, there's a lot of movement across them.
Next question. Sir.
Director Brennan, good evening. My name is Omar Siddiqui. I'm an attorney here in Southern California, and I also assist the FBI on issues of counterterrorism and national security. And within the past year, I've also been assisting the CIA in recruiting and assisting and spreading the word about the CIA to potential Middle Eastern American, Muslim American, Southeastern Asian communities here in Southern California. My question is, I'm frequently asked by community members that the existing White House administration seems to be doing great efforts to integrate the community. But the concern is, how will the objective of the CIA change if when there's a new president come later this year or next year?
Well, a lot of our authorities are grounded in law. And so we operate based on what our authorities allow us to do, as well as our responsibilities. And our missions are very well established as far as we engage in clandestine collection of information that is essential to our national security. We provide all sorts of analysis to the President and other senior policymakers, as well as to the Congress, about what's going on around the world. We have responsibilities on counterintelligence. We have a covert action responsibility when such covert action is deemed lawful and duly authorized by the President. The President has to authorize, through what's called a finding, any type of covert action that the CIA engages in. And so those findings will transcend administrations unless a new president decides to rescind one of those findings and then close out a covert action program. And also we have great responsibilities as far as liaison relationships around the world. So we are, after 68 years, pretty well versed in the types of things that we need to do in order to feed the national security establishment in the machinery. And so when a new administration comes in, they will rely heavily on the CIA and intelligence community so that they can get up to speed. I had the great fortune to be then President-elect Obama's, I led the intelligence team for the President-elect Obama team. So that between the period of the election day and inauguration day, I had to go around to all of the agencies and collect information about what the priorities were, the challenges are. Because once inauguration happens, everybody clears out from the White House. All the files and other things, they go into the presidential records. And so all of a sudden, in the third week of January or so, the new team of National Security Advisor, Deputy National Security Advisors, and others have the world's challenges to be responsible for. And so the intelligence community is so essential to make sure that they understand what it is that's going on. So I see great continuity in that regard. At the same time, there's a great onus responsibility on CIA for us to be able to explain what it is that we are doing, the priorities that we attach to these issues, how we are allocating our resources around the world so that we can educate and inform the new team that is coming in. So there could be some variations of these themes as the new team gets its sea legs, and a new administration, the president may decide to rescind some of those findings or start some new ones. But overall, the activities that are going on around the world by CIA officers, they will not be affected in those early days at all. We'll continue to carry out those missions that we have come to do over the last 68 years.
Other questions? Barry.
Thank you. I know you have a focus on cyber and combating cyber terrorism, but so much of garden variety criminality is now taking place on the so-called dark web, which provides a lot of anonymity, drug sales, illegal firearm sales. It's exacerbated by the anonymity you get from Bitcoin and other cyber currencies. From a national security and terrorism standpoint, how concerned should we be, and what is the CIA doing to stay ahead of the bad guys in terms of technology?
I think we should be very concerned. And when I'm asked, what is it that keeps me up at night? I don't have trouble falling asleep, though, at the end of the night. But when I do spend some time thinking about things that really worry me about the future, it is the vulnerabilities, the increasing vulnerabilities of our infrastructure, of our society, because of the emergence and growth of this digital domain. And because it takes so many different forms. It's not just how the terrorists can take advantage of the communication systems and use that for propaganda and incitement, encouragement, guidance, and training. It is how we are increasingly interconnected as a world as we go forward with the Internet of Things, and all of our various electronic instruments are going to be connected, and it's going to be very, very convenient that we can use our iPhones or whatever else to be able to adjust things at our home when we're far away. But it means that there are so many more attack vectors that can come in. Now, over the last year, we at CIA, we set up a new directorate for the first time in 50 years. We've had 4 directorates for most of our existence: analysis, operations, science, technology, and support. We established a new directorate of digital innovation last October after doing some studies, because I've told our workforce we need to master that environment. That digital environment is one basically that the United States mostly created. We need to understand not just the vulnerabilities and the threats and the challenges there, but the opportunities. We need to embrace it. I think for too long, sometimes we've tried to stave off this technological wave and have all these defensive, measures. We need to allow that wave to continue, but we need to be ahead of it, as you point out. And so we need to understand what those opportunities are. One of the things I tell people, particularly for CIA that has to operate clandestinely around the world, every new officer that comes in to CIA, those 111 that raised their hand this week, each one of them comes with a forensic history already in terms of what they've done throughout the course of their lives, as far as credit cards and banking and everything. That forensic history is not that difficult to recreate for a lot of our adversaries, not just nation states but others. And when they come on board the agency, we need to make sure that their forensic history that they accrue is going to be something that is not going to reveal who they are if they're going to be operating in different parts of the world clandestinely. And so the profile that they develop in that digital environment is one that needs to match what it is that they are doing. So that presents a tremendous challenge, and we need to understand that. We need to be able to take advantage of the data scientists that are out there and the technological wizards and whatever, because that digital environment is one where most human interactions are taking place more and more every day. And if we're not there in a major way, we're going to be far behind the curve. So our way of life has been profoundly affected by that digital environment, and it's growing. It's continuing to grow. It is the new frontier. It has profoundly affected the intelligence mission. So while Bill Donovan never even imagined what that the domain would exist, but now we are operating in there, and we're doing so many different things remotely. And what I have found is that the similarities of those challenges and opportunities between the intelligence profession and others. I went to a conference last year on medical technology, and for doctors and medical professionals to be able to interact and communicate in reliable and timely ways and make sure that their data is secure and they're able to tap in and pulse all the different data systems that are out there so that they can correlate those bits and pieces, very similar to the challenges of CIA. And so I want our people to get out more and interact with the private sector. I encourage externships on the part of CIA officers because although we think that our profession is unique, and is unique in many respects, we are nested within a global environment that is changing before our eyes and will continue to change. I can't even imagine what it's going to look like 20 or 25 years from now. It is outpacing our ability to keep up with it from a legal standpoint, from a policy standpoint. And so a lot of things that we just take for granted now, I think, you know, our children and our grandchildren are going to find it hard to believe that, you know, the Apple i6 or whatever it is, you actually relied on that? No. Now, people who are here with Apple, please don't take offense at that. But what I'm saying is that this is going to continue to change and evolve, and there are going to also, I believe, be some real breakthroughs in technology, game changers that are going to accelerate, I think, the pace, which we can't even anticipate right now.
In that regard, could you say something about In-Q-Tel, which was, again, another very interesting innovation by CIA, and it's in California, so those of us who are provincial like me will want to hear about it.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that the CIA and the intelligence community develop in-house because there are very unique capabilities. But a lot of things that we do are leveraging the technological innovations that the private sector has. And so about 15 years ago, we decided rather than wait for things that would emerge from that private sector innovation, we would try to stimulate those areas that held great promise for the types of things we're interested in. So In-Q-Tel was set up, which is basically a sort of a unique venture capital sort of entrepreneurial enterprise as a way to help to nurture and develop those types of creative initiatives that hold promise for the types of things that we're trying to do. So in San Jose tomorrow, I'll be talking to the annual meeting of the CEOs of In-Q-Tel, where the board will be there, where I'll talk in a similar fashion here about the different challenges that we face as a nation and as an organization, as a way to maybe help stimulate some of the thinking about what is it that we need to do in order to take better advantage of the tremendous volumes of information and data that we're able to collect. Our ability to correlate and process and to make sense of it, though, is increasingly challenged. So we need the assistance of the private sector. So the more the private sector can understand about our business, our profession, our mission, and the challenges we face and the types of things that we are looking for breakthroughs, I think the better off that we will be. And also it allows the private sector to have some prospective clients that will invest in their initiatives.
Other questions? Sir.
Good evening, Director Brennan. My name is Charles Bell. I'm with the U.S. Navy, and thank you, Jerry, for allowing me to ask a question. I'm very fortunate to be a member of the Pacific Council. I find myself in front of a lot of people with distinguished careers and backgrounds, and I'm also very fortunate to be an officer in the United States Navy. So my question goes back to diversity, and so how does the CIA find someone who doesn't have that Ivy League background, who might have a little bit of challenges and problems, their financial statement isn't that great, but they want to be a CIA operator, they want to work in the CIA, and they want to change the world? How do you find them?
Well, good question. I try to talk to as many student groups and sort of hiring blitzes that we have as possible, but we also need to reach out to a number of areas that traditionally we've had difficult time recruiting. I'll give you a number of examples. One is that, and we recently had a principals committee meeting that Susan Rice chaired of all the members of the national security agencies to take a look at what our record has been on diversity and inclusion within this national security realm. And I must say that a number of agencies fall far short, including CIA, particularly in the Hispanic population. We are well below the federal average as well as the workforce average as far as Hispanics within CIA. We need to do a better job of reaching out and also trying to convince members of the Hispanic community that there is a professional future for them. We refer to ourselves as the CIA family because we go through some really tough times together, and people sometimes, I think of the CIA based on maybe the Homeland series that they watch or the movies or whatever else, and a lot of times the headlines are rather off-putting because of claims of torture and other things, and I think a lot of people feel as though that's not an organization that they want to belong to. So bad on us for not doing a better job of representing ourselves more accurately. Sometimes it's really tough, though, to push back to a lot of things that come out in the media because by dint of what we do, a lot of it is classified, we can't really address it. But last year, we issued a study called Diversity and Leadership in CIA. I asked Brennan Jordan, former senior administration official in the Clinton administration, and a very well-respected individual, to lead up a study that included Mike Mullen, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, that took a very hard look at the agency's record. And it was very critical of the agency as far as not reaching the goals and objectives that we had set for ourselves over the course of a number of different administrations. And we attributed that to the fact that the CIA is so mission-driven. Our inbox rules our lives. And so we go from one fire to the next crisis, and these strategic initiatives, these organizational imperatives frequently fall by the wayside. And we really need to make sure that there's senior level attention to this. And so I've committed that and I go out to various groups, going out to another group next week in New York. I feel particularly proud of what the agency has done on a number of fronts, to include on the LGBT front. I have been asked by The Economist to participate in a 24-hour round-the-globe session, New York, Hong Kong, and London next week, called Pride and Prejudice, and CIA, and I was asked to go there because of the progress that we've made inside of CIA on the LGBT front. When I joined the agency in 1980, gay, lesbian individuals were not allowed to hold a security clearance. They were basically drummed out of the service. We've made great strides, and I do take pride in what the agency has done. Now, we still fall short in a number of areas, but we have a website, we go out to colleges, we have regular recruiting drives, but we need to get our message out more and more. And it's not just to student groups, it's also to groups like this who are thought leaders, influencers within communities. You know the aspiring young men and women of your communities that are looking for a rewarding career. And as I've told the agency officers I swear in every month, you can make a lot more money, you can have more hours in the week, maybe more vacation time, pursuing other opportunities. But I can tell you that I have found no more enriching and personally rewarding experience than I've had in my time at CIA, because what we do is really, for this country and trying to pay back this country what it is that we have been so blessed to have the great benefit of. So we still need to do more, and if people have ideas and thoughts in this, as well as opportunities, I'd love to be able to take advantage of them.
We have time for one more question. Sir.
Good evening, Director Brennan. My name is John Nahas. I have a background in public diplomacy. I've worked and lived in the Middle East as well as Russia. My question for you, sir, is around the world there's so many stories regarding misinformation about what the United States does or does not do and what we are and are not involved in. And those are so quick to gain negative headlines and paint a picture of us rather than ourselves painting and framing a picture of our own actions. Just like we engage in counterintelligence, why is there not more resources dedicated to counterinformation or to highlighting the shortcomings of our adversaries, perhaps? I think, there's so much more of a benefit and a cost and a reward to cost for such a small thing that we could do to gain the goodwill of people around the world, to better inform them, to do public diplomacy, which is easier than doing so much else, and at the same time can paint us in a better picture or improve our image and maybe hurt the image of our adversaries as well? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. You would think that the United States, which is the leader in communication and entertainment and media, that we would be far ahead of our adversaries in terms of representing the truth in the American way. Now, the truth is elusive at times, and there's a lot of debate about what it is that we are doing, and we well know that politics tends to seep into that national discourse and narrative in terms of what we're doing and the rightness of policies or whatever else, and I think that tends to sort of undermine that message and that public diplomacy as they're able to point to a number of individuals who really are quite critical of what it is that either the United States as a whole, the government, or the administration is doing. But it is something that I think we as a country really need to come to grips with, because there is a lot of misrepresentation. And I do agree that messaging is so important. And it's so unfortunate that our adversaries of the ilk of ISIL was able to gain such attraction and attention in social media. How they have been able to exploit that social media environment to propagate, to recruit, and to have their narrative carry the day with so many individuals around the globe. There are legal considerations in terms of what it is that the government can do in terms of pushing things out. And sometimes I think we shy away from being more aggressive in this area. But I certainly agree with what it is that you say that we need to do on that world stage. Because the United States still is looked upon by the world for being the leader on so many fronts. And even our adversaries watch very carefully almost every word we say. So we need to be able to take full advantage of that. If that was the last question, I just want to take a moment, and this is sort of a commercial announcement, but I mentioned that I swore in 111 officers this week, and we always do it in our lobby, and we do it in front of our memorial wall. And on our memorial wall, there are 113 stars, and each one of those stars represents a man or woman from CIA who gave their life for this country in the last full measure of devotion, whether it be in terrorist attacks or they fell overseas in the pursuit of their mission. I administer the oath in front of that wall to make sure that every new officer who joins the CIA family understands the legacy and tradition and responsibility that each officer has to our mission, and also to the legacy of each one of those officers, many of whom I and others knew very well. And every year there is an effort to try to make sure that we take care of the families of those officers. Every May we have a memorial ceremony where we bring back family members. And there are family members of CIA officers who died in the 1950s who return. Grandchildren, grandnieces and nephews. They come back because they want to feel part of this, and every year we read the names of those officers. There is a nonprofit organization, the CIA Officers Memorial Foundation, which every year has held a fundraising event in Washington, in Northern Virginia. And this year they're holding their first ever West Coast fundraiser here in Los Angeles on September the 29th. And it is to provide educational support to the children and families of CIA officers killed in the line of duty. And so the organizer of this event is a fellow Pacific Council member, and who is here tonight, and that's Josh Lobel. Josh, you're over there. And I just want to let you know that he'll be in touch, and that the website is ciamemorialfoundation.org. And given that it's a nonprofit, and given that there's been recent legislation that allows me to state factually the mission of this foundation, I am taking full advantage of this opportunity here as a way to pay tribute to your fellow Americans and their families for their dedication to this country.
Director Brennan, I want to, on behalf of all of us, you've spent your entire life working for the United States government and the Central Intelligence Agency, living in such garden spots as Riyadh and other places. So obviously, the sacrifices you've made have been considerable. And I, just on behalf of all of your fellow Americans in California, thank you for all you've done for us. Thank you for all.
I have the best job in the world. Don't think I make sacrifices. That is the best job in the world.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.